Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about A Doll's House, and I'm going to be focusing mainly on the way in which all of the three acts begin in terms of the stage directions, because the stage directions can actually tell us a lot about how we're supposed to interpret the setting and the characters, and also some contextual details as well. I'm going to finish this video by focusing on what's known as the well-made play structure, which will become clearer towards the end of the video. So jumping straight into Act 1. Act 1, as you might expect, because it's the beginning of the text, has the longest stage directions because it's the first thing that we read. So it's important for a writer to introduce and contextualize what it is that an audience is seeing, or if you have the text, reading. I've highlighted here some of the significant factors that I would want to zoom in to talk about. Notice the repetition of doors in pink here, lots of focus on doors. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, this just happens to be a front room, and a lounge might have lots of doors. That's true if the lounge is the centre of the house. However, this is English, and there's often symbolism in terms of why writers do what they do. So a door in this case is indicative of keeping people out, but it can also keep people in. And if you think about the significance of doors, if you think of the way the play ends, the last thing that we hear is the sound of the door being slammed as Nora makes her exit. And critics at the time said that that sound reverberated around the world. So clearly doors are important. I'd also link this to the idea of Halma's office here. If you have looked in my previous videos for Doll's House, you will be familiar with the term of the separate spheres, which is this idea that society expects very distinct things from men and women. So whereas men occupied the world of finance and business and money and respectability, women often occupied the domain of the home, which included children, nurturing. If they did work, it would be nannying, and of course being on hand for their husbands. So women in this case often represented the domestic sphere of a particular family. And I would link the idea of doors to Halma's office because that office is symbolic of that masculine world. And one of the first things that we see in this play is Nora creeping up to Halma's office door, but not going inside. And I don't think she actually ends up going into that office at all in the whole play. That's because that room is out of bounds for her. It's the world of masculine respectability and finance, which is at odds with the roles that women are supposed to have at the time. Based on the details of this home, it's middle class, it's domestic, it's homely. Of course, it's winter time, meaning that the stove and the fire is on, so it's quite cozy and welcoming. And what we are invited to believe is that this is a home which is preparing for the festive season, which of course is often very cozy and welcoming. However, this depiction of harmony and equilibrium, of course, doesn't last forever, as we know. And it's because of that, perhaps, which is why the play became quite controversial at the time, and I'm sure to some still is. We know, based on reading the ending, that this is going to be their last Christmas, in fact, as a married couple. And even though that's the case, Christmas was also regarded as the festival of the home, a time of togetherness and kind of that sense of cordiality between family members. We learn, though, of course, that the home is not expensively furnished, and that perhaps links to the idea that Halma is more conservative with his money, whereas Nora wants to spend it. And again, you have just clues here at the beginning in terms of their money habits, that they might be two very different people. Of course, this play is all about money, getting more money, trying to get a loan, etc. So money is often a driving force for the action of this play. Finally, we're told that there is a small bookcase with finely bound books. And this means, of course, that the people in this household are educated. And in order to afford books, as has always been the case, there has to be, therefore, a degree of disposable income. So some details here from the opening of Act 1. The stage directions for Act 2 and Act 3 are much shorter, but the way in which both of those acts begin is with this very short sentence, the same room. And of course, because this play takes place within one room, it recreates that sense of claustrophobia and that sense of tension as we build towards the climax in Act 3. I'll talk more about that in a second. It was a German tradition of households having trees, which was introduced to Norway in the middle of the 19th century, first in the towns among the middle class or the bourgeoisie, as Helmer and Nora represent. Traditionally, the tree was decorated in secret by the parents before the doors to the living room were opened on Christmas Eve. And this is why Nora, at the beginning of the play, the first thing that she says, in fact, is hide the Christmas tree, Helen, because the children cannot see it. That's because tradition dictated that the children should not see the tree before the parents had decorated it. So that's a link there to the context. However, the depiction of this Christmas tree is symbolic. It's described through these adjectives as stripped and dishevelled, with its candles also burning down to the stubs. And of course, in today's health and safety world, the idea of putting candles on a Christmas tree seems to be inherently dangerous, and I imagine it was, with lots of fires over the years during these times. Um, but this is metaphorical, of course, again, because it's representing metaphorically the atmosphere of the home, but it's also representing the fractured relationship between the two protagonists here. Um, there's a section that Dr. Rank mentions, which is about breathing in foul-smelling air. This kind of semantic field in this play about disease and being in an infirmary as well. So the tree is also potentially becoming dishevelled because the atmosphere and the air in this home is becoming kind of more diseased because of the lies, the secrets, and the blackmail. I think it's called miasma, which relates to kind of bad smells. So the tree is giving us a clue that because of the rising tension in this home, that we're moving towards some kind of building of the tension and the climax, and it threatens that depiction that we see in Act 1 of the familial harmony and togetherness that we perhaps expect from a middle-class family at Christmas. Finally, Nora, who spends most of her time in this room in the play, of course, is alone. And we've got that adverb anxiously, which is used several times, in fact, throughout the play to show that this is a character who is nervous and isolated and trapped within the dystopian reality of this home. Finally, Act 3, again, it begins the same room, so that feeling of claustrophobia continues. By this point, the Helmers are attending the party upstairs, and Nora is doing her tarantella dance. And it's kind of one last opportunity for happiness and celebration before the marriage ultimately dissolves in Act 3. However, on stage at the moment, waiting for Krogstad, is Mrs. Lind, or Mrs. Linde as she's sometimes pronounced. And she's leafing distractedly and anxiously through books. She can't keep focused. And again, it reinforces that tension, that it's not just Nora that feels on edge, it's also Mrs. Lind here, as well, as she looks at that front door for Krogstad to enter. At this point, she's on a mission. She is trying to get the letter back from Krogstad, or to get it out of the letterbox, or to forgive it. And in the end, of course, she says, no, leave it there because they need openness in their marriage now. So she changes her mind. And it's interesting because Mrs. Lind and Krogstad finish the play opposite to Nora and Helmer in terms of they have each other, whereas Nora and Helmer have no one. So that's also the significance there of the brief beginning of Act 3. Just to finish this video, I just want to talk about the structure of the play, and the structure of the play fits into what's known as the well-made play structure, which follows this kind of line graph. So I've changed a couple of these labels just for more focus on a doll's house. So at the beginning, of course, Act 1, we have the equilibrium. We have a woman who seems to be happily preparing for Christmas, decorating the tree, looking forward to the party, seemingly quite intimate relationship with her husband, language there suggesting a degree of kind of affection, and everything seems well. But even in Act 1, through the entrance of Mrs. Lind, of course, prompts Nora to reveal her secret about the loan. And that begins to rise the tension here, to increase the tension. Then we have the climax, the consequences of that climax, and then the resolution. So linking this specifically to A Doll's House, very briefly, of course, you have the idealistic family home at the beginning. You have the loan issue, the blackmail, Helmer firing Krogstad, or that's at least his intention now that he's in charge of the bank, because he's already promised that job to Mrs. Lind, remember. The climax is undoubtedly Helmer finding out about the loan and his initial shock and disgust. Despite his best efforts, because Krogstad ultimately does forgive the loan or the IOU, it's too late, and that prompts Helmer and Nora to have a grown-up conversation about their marriage. So the consequences of that climax and Helmer's outburst, and the resolution, which is the sound of that door slamming, which reverberated around the world. The doll has essentially left the house. So that's just a little brief summary of how this play meets the well-made play structure format. Okay, so hopefully that was useful. We discussed the opening stage directions and also the well-made play structure. Thank you for watching and good luck in your studies.